Hello, this is Brian Auten of Apologetics315. Today I'm speaking with Ellis Potter. Ellis is the pastor of the International English-Speaking Church of Lausanne in Switzerland and a former member of LaBrie Fellowship. He was born in California and was a Zen Buddhist for many years before becoming a Christian, and he's lectured and preached all over the world, but his main area of ministry work has been in Eastern Europe for the last 20 years. Today I'll be asking Ellis about his conversion from Buddhism, his interaction with Francis Schaeffer, and his approach to apologetics. So thanks for speaking with me today, Ellis.
Glad to be with you, Brian.
So before we talk about your story, what sort of ministry work are you currently involved in?
Currently, I'm pastoring the church in Lausanne. I live in Basel, and it's a 3-hour commute, but I only work 20% for the church. I go 2 weekends a month. And one of the reasons for that is because my work involves a lot of travel. And I go, as you said, to Eastern Europe, but in a couple of weeks I'm going to go to Australia, and I will go to Norway in October, and in December to Romania, and in January to Hawaii, and there are a lot of places to go. And I lecture and preach in churches and lecture at universities and in schools of various Christian organizations.
Now, there are a lot of different things we could talk about today, and let's start with your past experience with Zen Buddhism. You were a Buddhist monk, and you got acquainted with Francis Schaeffer's work at LaBrie, and you ended up converting to Christianity. Now, could you tell our listeners about your overall journey?
Yes, I grew up in California in a Christian family and in a church, but the Christians that I knew were not very interested in dealing with the questions that I had about various things. So I began to shop around, and I tried and became involved in a lot of different religious organizations and philosophies, and finally settled on Zen Buddhism for a variety of reasons. One is that Zen Buddhists are always interested in absolutes. They want to know the bottom line and the outside parameter of things. They're not relativists. They're not situationists. They want to know the whole story. And that was attractive to me because I did too. And also, actually, they were the only group I ever had contact with that does not sell jewelry. And that seemed very non-commercial and clean and somehow pure to me. So I became a Zen Buddhist and was for several years. And then at the end of that time, I left everything and lived in a monastery for a while. And then I traveled because Zen Buddhist monks generally travel. They go to other monasteries and have different experiences in the world. And I came to Europe not knowing if I was going to go on to Japan, but I began in Europe. And when I was in Europe, I met an old friend from California who was a Christian at the time and who had heard of Francis Schaeffer and L'Abri and wanted to visit. He traveled with me, and we had a lot of interesting experiences. And then he wanted to go to L'Abri and said I could go with him if I wanted to. And so I did. And we went in 1975 in November, and I stayed there about 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and I didn't like it very much because people talked while they ate, and it was noisy, and I was used to lots and lots of silence in a monastery, and it didn't seem very spiritual somehow to me. And so I went to Italy for 4 months, and I studied the Japanese tea ceremony in Rome and visited monasteries. And then I got tired of trying to speak Italian, and my friend was still at LaBrie, and I wanted to see him. And I also thought that the ideas I had heard at LaBrie were so dangerously wrong that someone should go and help these people. So I went as a missionary of Zen Buddhism to L'Abri and became a student because that seemed to be the best way to make contact and find out what they were all about. And I was a student in L'Abri for 3 months, and then I became a Christian, very much to my surprise, and stayed and worked and helped in L'Abri for the next 18 years.
If some of our listeners are like me, they're familiar with Francis Schaeffer, his work, and they've heard about LaBrie and, that LaBrie, that's what Francis Schaeffer started. But I didn't know what that actually was until I was able to sit down with you and ask you what it was and how that place works. So can you explain to our listeners who may not know, what is this place LaBrie and what's so special about it?
Yes, well, it's actually a number of places in the world by now, and they are communities of Christians who live together in families and also single people. And there are two main principles of the work. One is to be a shelter, which is what the word L'Abri means in French, and to be there for whoever has need. And the other is to be an evidence in the world of the existence of God and his working in the world by living by faith in a kind of a radical way. So L'Abri does not advertise, and it does not recruit, and it does not raise funds, which is a bit counterintuitive for most Christian organizations and other organizations in the world. But it's been going for 55 years without any fundraising, and so people in L'Abri think that God actually wants it to exist because the finances keep happening by miracle. And people come to L'Abri to be students. Although L'Abri is not a school, there's no course of study. The study is individual and tutorial, and people work with a tutor. They live in community, and they eat together with other people. Once a day, there's what's called a formal meal or a discussion meal, where people talk about whatever they want to talk about with a staff worker of L'Abri at the meal. It's sort of like a seminar with food. And then there are lectures, not necessarily in a course of study, but the subjects of the lectures are decided upon on the basis of who is there studying and what they might need at that time. And the students study half a day and work half a day in the community. And this is a part of the L'Abri experience, to work in the kitchen or the garden and to be with other people and to live the Christian life, not just in an academic way, but in a practical way of being together in community and needing and serving each other. There are L'Abris in England and Switzerland and Brazil and Canada and America and Australia and Holland and Sweden and various places. And there's a very good website where people can find out much more about it.
So you're at L'Abri, and you're still a Buddhist. And what started to happen to shift your thinking or challenge your direction?
I asked a lot of questions, and Francis Schaeffer was alive and working there in the community at the time, and he was very generous with his answers to my questions. And it was a gradual process of working through a number of issues. And one of my questions was about epistemology, was about how do we know? And my basic question was, can a human being have a relationship of knowledge with something outside of that human being, which is valid and stable? And in Buddhism, you would say no, that the relationship is unity and being, and that there actually isn't anything outside the self or outside the Buddha nature. And that is a very strong, absolute way of considering reality that's very attractive in lots of ways. And what I was hearing about at LaBrie was that there were relationships in reality on an absolute level as the basic framework. And so that was my basic question. And the way God worked with me was to remember a song that I had sung in college from an operetta by Gilbert and Sullivan. And the beginning of the song is, "Who are you who asked this question?" And so I asked myself, who is asking all of these questions that I was asking? And the Buddhist answer to that question would be, asking is. And the Christian answer is, I am asking. And I am asking what is outside of myself in a relationship. And that began really to strike me as more basically true about my situation and my experience of myself and my environment, because I couldn't remember a time ever when I was not asking questions. It was really a basic part of who I am and who I always have experienced myself to be. And in Christianity, as the Bible presents it, we never lose that. We always have the reality of asking questions and relating. So in Christ, the asking is validated and stabilized and perpetuated and enlivened, whereas in Buddhism, it comes to an end in unity. And so it seemed to me, yes, a person could believe the Buddhist view, a person can believe anything, but that it took more faith to believe that than to believe in the Christian understanding of reality. And I'd always been a bit suspicious of faith because people really can believe in anything. And one of the main reasons I became a Christian is because it became clear to me that it takes less faith to believe in Christianity than it does to believe in anything else.
So in your dealings with Francis Schaeffer on your journey to Christianity, how did he influence the way you approach apologetics and your own questioning nature?
After I became a Christian and I was living and working in LaBrie, I was able to observe Francis Schaeffer's apologetics, and it influenced me a great deal. Francis Schaeffer's apologetics were presuppositional. They weren't circumstantial or emotional or experiential or particularly academic. They were presuppositional. They were not beginning with the emotional, moral condition of a person. They were dealing with how the person saw reality. What did they presuppose were the criteria and the shape of reality, and beginning a discussion on that level. And that was useful to me as a non-Christian to begin on that level, because it's a very human level. It's not a particularly religious level or cultural level. It's a human level that applies to people all over the world in every different culture. And also it was very interesting to me that Francis Schaeffer did not have a method of apologetics, and he used to tell us that we must not have a method, but that we must be servants and that we must go in the way that the people need to go, that we were trying to serve, and not trying to get a person to fit into our method or program or 10 steps or whatever it might be, but to become all things to all men and to be flexible and to speak to different people in different ways. And that has stuck with me through the years.
Now, in one of your lectures, you talk about apologetics being a function of love. So would you mind unpacking that idea just a bit?
No, I would be happy to. God is love. And when we belong to God and are His children in the fullest sense through Jesus Christ, then our main function is love, is serving, reaching out, going out, caring for others, and making choices that promote and support the reality of the people that we're relating to. And so it seems to me that the main function of the Christian life is to love. And apologetics can be one of the functions of that love. It can be part of the love, one of the ways that that love expresses itself as sort of a subset, as it were, of that love. That love is the larger category. And however we study or practice apologetics, I think that the goal, the aim of the apologetics should be to serve the function of love. And that if we lose that, we lose everything, like Paul is saying in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, that if we know everything and we win all the arguments and we don't love, then it's just noise. Mm-hmm. It's just an empty game. So the goal of studying and learning and practicing and daring and reaching out is not to win or to even convince, but to love and to serve and to support and to enable and to invite people into their actual reality as God has made them to be.
It's similar to something that I heard J.P. Moreland say, that apologetics is just helping people. And, you're loving them and you're helping them and you're walking alongside, so to speak. Now, look, another one of these ideas you talk about is kategorics. Could you define that and its role?
Yeah, well, in the Greek court system, at the time when the New Testament was written, there was the apologia and the kategoria. And the kategoria was the accusation, was the presentation of the categories of law and crime and violation and these kinds of things. And then the apologia was the defense against the prosecution of the categoria. And it seems to me that it might be wise not to put the whole weight on the idea of defense, because the Great Commission is go ye into all the world, not build ye a castle and defend it. And the going into the world involves the categorics of serving the world with the categories of reality, of making suggestions, of asking questions about whether the basic categories of reality are personal or mechanical, relational, or in some sort of a chemical functioning, whether there is only unity or also diversity in reality. You see those basic categories of reality. So when we offer and suggest and invite people into considering the basic biblical categories of reality, then I would call that more kategorics, as a part of evangelism, of reaching out, of going into the world to make disciples. And then the defense, the apologetics, is also very necessary, because people will object and attack and ridicule and be frightened about the categories of Christianity, and will try to dismiss them. And then there needs to be a level of defense. But I would say it's an active passivity, and that the active part is more the categorics, the providing the categories for the world that needs them. And then the more passive part would be the apologetics, the defending when people make objections about those categories.
From your experience with Francis Schaeffer, to what extent did he employ that in, say, what he would call taking the roof off? Can you explain that concept and how it relates to this topic?
Well, I think what he meant by taking the roof off is that he would open up a conversation into the broadest, deepest levels possible, that he would invite a person to think issues through in a contextualized way, down to the bottom and out to the edges. And that he wouldn't want to leave a person with a shelter of prejudiced presuppositions or cultural background or assumptions that are not validated and cannot be sustained or defended, that he would take the roof off so that people would have to go really radically back to basics and rethink the various assumptions that they had about reality.
One of the things that is like the signature of LaBrie is that element of community. And you've got that interaction with people that is allowed to go deeper, as you say, so that, for instance, Francis Schaeffer can really ask deeper questions and challenge belief systems at a deeper level. How do you think that Christians can have that same sort of mindset where they're not just thinking of people as single encounters, but relationships that are deep enough that those things can be explored?
Yes. Maybe I can illustrate it with a little story. I was invited to lead a beach evangelism in Australia a few years ago. And it wasn't something I'd ever considered doing, and I didn't want to do it, but I ended up doing it. And I said, well, you have to do it my way. And they said, okay, we're tired of doing it our way. We want to do it your way. So I went, and I said, okay, we're going out, and we're meeting people on the beach, and you have two goals to reach. And the first goal is, in meeting people and talking with them, to see them again. That's a primary goal. So whatever you say, whatever you do, should not violate the possibility of seeing the person again. And the second goal is, during the encounter and discussion, to raise the questions that can be only answered by Jesus. You notice that the goal is not to give the answer. We know that Jesus is the answer. But one of the first two goals is not necessarily to give the answer, but to raise the question and to see the people again. So the questions that can only be answered by Jesus are questions of identity, meaning, purpose, guilt, forgiveness, goals, eternity. These kinds of questions can only truly, really be answered by Jesus and kept in focus by Jesus. And so this is where we want the discussion to go. Initially, not necessarily to provide answers for those questions, but just to invite the person to begin to consider those questions and involve themselves in working with those questions. And then we can pray for the person and support the person, remembering that our first goal is to see the person again.
I think that's really helpful and refreshingly different.
We had a T-shirt for this beach evangelism. I have never worn a text on my clothing in my life, but they made this text for me because I was using it. They made a T-shirt with this text on it, and it said across the front of the T-shirt, Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." John 21:12a. And that was the theme of our whole evangelistic week, was come and have breakfast. And people saw this T-shirt and asked questions like, is that in the Bible? Or did Jesus really say that? Well, then you get a very interesting discussion. And you can ask, well, what do you think about a God who wants to have breakfast with you? For me, the questions are essential in apologetics and evangelism. And when I consider who was the first person who needed to be evangelized, it was Adam. And who was the one who evangelized Adam? It was God. And when you look in the 3rd chapter of Genesis, you see God's method of evangelizing. And it was a series of questions. It was not statements. So his first question to Adam is, where are you? And that's a very deep and wonderful question. God knows everything. He's not looking for information. He knows where Adam is. The question is a gift so that Adam can realize for himself where he is. And this is the kind of gift that we should be giving to the people that we meet, the really valuable questions that help them to come into an encounter with themselves and to consider who they are and where they belong and how they fit and what their meaning is. So when God asked, where are you? And we ask, where are you? It means, where are you psychologically? Where are you in meaning? Where are you in purpose? Where are you in hope? Where are you in fear? Where are you in your goals? Where are you in your frustration? Where are you in general? Now, Adam's answer was true and accurate and very sad. He said, I am in nakedness and fear and hiding. So that's not very positive, but it was true. And so it was very valuable for Adam to realize where he was. And then God asked Adam, who told you? Where did you get this information? What are your sources? And are they reliable? And that can be our second question. Who told you? Did your mother tell you? Did your pastor tell you? Did your professors tell you? Did the advertisers tell you? How did you get these ideas about where you are? And do you trust the sources? And then the third question is, have you eaten? Are you guilty? Have you brought this problem upon yourself, or are you only a victim? And here Adam's answer was very bad and very wrong. He did not say, yes, I have eaten. He said, I am a victim. I am a victim of the woman, and I am a victim of you because you gave her to me. And so he's declaring his innocence, and then he's totally lost because he's not innocent. But you see, the guilt comes last. The first question is, don't you know you're a sinner? The first question is, where are you? And the second question is, who told you? And then, are you responsible? Are you guilty? And it seems to me that in the foundation of the early chapters of Genesis, this is the method that God uses and shows us. And perhaps we should adopt various forms of this method of God in our own apologetics and evangelizing.
You're kind of giving great advice here. So if you're speaking to the next generation of Christian apologists, what else would you tell them along these lines?
Well, I would say apologetics tends to have a flavor of academic about it. And in that sense, it's been in some ways pushed in a corner by the Enlightenment rationalistic humanism, which believes that truth is only objective and that the Bible has to jump through objective truth claim hoops in order for anyone to accept it as objective, as true. But it seems to me that truth is not only objective, that there is subjective truth, that there is accurate truth, and there is non-accurate truth in life and in the Bible. And what I would advise people is, yes, do the study, learn the history, learn the literary criticism, learn the archaeology, learn all of these things as God calls you and gives you opportunity. But don't isolate themselves from the subjective aspects of truth and the non-accurate aspects of truth. So in the Bible, it says there was a Babylonian empire, and Nebuchadnezzar was the king. That is accurate truth. And if you do research and you find out there never was such an empire or anyone named Nebuchadnezzar, then there's a problem with the Bible. But when you do the research, you find out that the Bible is accurate. So that's the accurate part of truth. But the parables of Jesus are not accurate. You cannot do research and find out the name of the mother of the prodigal son. You cannot find out the name of the prodigal son because he never existed. He's not accurate. And the story isn't even finished. But it's true. It's deeply true. It's not inaccurate. Accuracy just isn't the point. The point is life and truth. And it isn't that accuracy isn't important, but it shouldn't fill the whole screen. It's not the only thing that we need to take into consideration when we're dealing with people and when we're dealing with God's personal truth. So in our own contemporary existence, if you want to build a true bridge, you have to build it accurately, or it's not true. But you cannot fall in love accurately. The process is chaotic, but you can truly fall in love. So you have the true bridge and the true love. And you have a very interesting situation if you fall in love on a bridge. You see how they fit together. And that would be a piece of advice I would love to give to people who want to learn and to progress in serving as apologists and evangelists, is keep those two parts of God's truth together, the accurate and the non-accurate, in a complementary whole, and not just going all in one direction or all in the other direction, which human beings tend to do. They tend to either be legalistic and scientific and mathematical, or they tend to be mystical and experiential and emotional. But it seems to me that God's truth is the whole truth of both sides, held together by the power of the Word of Jesus Christ. And that should be our goal for living and our goal for serving and caring and inviting people into God's truth.
Well, Ellis, I want to thank you for speaking with me today. It's really been interesting, and I bless you in your ministry.
Well, thank you, Brian. It was good to talk with you, and God bless you and all the people who might listen to this conversation.
I've been speaking with Ellis Potter. He's pastor of the International English-Speaking Church of Lausanne in Switzerland. Links to his webpage, his audios, and resources can be found at today's blog post at Apologetics315. And this is Brian Auten. Thanks for listening.